Welcome to meeting number 18 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. Happy to welcome Ms. Idlout today, Ms. Taylor-Roy, and Mr. May. Welcome to the, Mr. Ruff and Ms. Gallant. My apologies. We're welcoming you to the committee. Bienvenue à la réunion.
Welcome to meeting number 18 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research.
Taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. We're really pleased to have this last meeting on small nuclear reactors. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083, and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 1st, 2022, we are meeting on a study of small modular nuclear reactors. A few comments for the benefit of our witnesses and members. For those participating via video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, as you know, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. And now I would like to welcome all our witnesses. We're delighted to have you. You have a really interested committee here. So from Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, we have Amy Gottschling, Vice President, Science, Technology, and Commercial Oversight. From the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, we have Carolyn Ducrot, Director General, Advanced Reactor Technologies, and Brian Torrey, Director General, Directorate of Safety Management. From the Department of Natural Resources, we have André Bernier, Director General, Electricity Resources Branch, and Daniel Brady, Deputy Director, Nuclear Science and Technology. Each organization will have 5 minutes to present. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up this yellow card. It'll let you know you have about 30 seconds left. And with that, colleagues, we welcome our witnesses, and we will begin tonight with the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. The floor is yours.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, let me begin by telling you that today I attended the first day of the Women in Nuclear Canada Conference. This year is the largest attendance the conference has ever had, selling out at 500 attendees. And I can tell you that the energy and excitement in the room was invigorating. These women that make up 23% of the nuclear industry are mothers, daughters, sisters, students, and young leaders who know they have a career in an industry that is making a difference in our world. They know that they are supporting a technology that plays an instrumental role in promoting human health and addressing the world's challenges in energy, clean energy, and environmental sustainability. Madam Chair, these women are our nuclear workforce of today and of the future, a future which includes nuclear as part of its energy mix. I would also like to acknowledge that this conference has the privilege of Indigenous participation and has embraced their beautiful culture, teachings, and traditions. I will share what I learned this week with my children. The conference is being held in Niagara Falls, which is situated within the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. Let me turn now to the matter of SMRs, which is why we are gathered here this evening. As you may know, the Government of Canada, through AECL, designed and built nuclear demonstration reactors, research reactors, and the generating CANDU reactors in Canada. Today, we no longer build reactors, but we support reactor developers through the Chalk River Laboratories, the largest scientific facility in Canada. As you have seen in the world of SMRs, there is a great variety of designs. Our role as a laboratory owner is to support reactor vendors in validating those designs. Our broader role is to meet the Government of Canada's requirements for nuclear expertise, certainly for the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission and for another 13 government departments and agencies. We deliver those roles through our oversight of Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, or CNL. In addition to activities to revitalize our campus, they're performing hundreds of experiments, qualification tests, and nuclear technology demonstrations every day. The foundational sciences of SMR technologies are not new. Universities and research laboratories around the world have been researching, developing, and demonstrating these technologies for decades. That the market has rebranded them as SMRs and brought them forward at a time when we need every available technology to solve this climate crisis is the crucial turning point. And ACL is here to support this pivotal moment in time. As we turn our minds to getting Canada to net zero by 2050, ACL has been working to ensure that the Government of Canada maintains and retains strong capabilities in the most promising SMR technologies that the market will bring to mitigate this climate crisis. ACL has the ability to create a nexus where academia, government, and private industry can align to ensure safe and expeditious deployment of nuclear technologies. As an example, last month, CNL broke ground on the Advanced Nuclear Materials Research Center. This center will have 23 labs and 12 hot cells and is a continuation of services that will support Canada's reactors, both large and small, to produce electricity and medical isotopes to 2060 and beyond. But we do not promote nuclear to the exclusion of other renewables. That is not necessary. In fact, they can be complementary. Nuclear reactors like SMRs are quickly becoming a catalyst for the hydrogen market due to their reliable source of electricity and heat, both of which are needed to serve the different hydrogen production technologies. Furthermore, SMRs can be switched into and out of hydrogen production as electricity demand fluctuates. At our Chalk River site, CNL is already exploring how to leverage various clean and renewable energy sources and how they work together in a hybrid energy system. I urge you to consider these exciting developments. I will conclude by extending an invitation through you, Madam Chair, to the committee to come and visit Canadian Nuclear Laboratories and see what ACL is accomplishing for the benefit of all Canadians. Thank you. Merci et miigwech.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gottschling, and for your kind invitation to the committee. We are glad to have you here tonight. We will now go to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Chair and members of the committee, my name is Carolyn Ducro, and I'm pleased to join you virtually here in Ottawa, the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. I am the Director General of Advanced Reactor Technologies at the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, CNSC, Canada's independent nuclear regulator. I am joined today by Brian Torrey, CNSC's Director General of Safety Management. For the CNSC, safety always comes first. Regardless of the project proposed, we will never issue a license unless fully satisfied of its safety. In these brief remarks, I will provide the CNSC's perspective on, firstly, deploying SMRs in Canada to help meet climate change commitments. Secondly, advancing SMR-related science and research in Canada. And thirdly, ensuring the safe deployment of SMRs globally. SMRs are novel nuclear technologies seen by multiple Canadian provinces as a means to help combat climate change. Ontario Power Generation's Darlington New Nuclear Project puts Canada at the forefront of assessing a grid-scale SMR among G7 countries. The CNSC is committed to safety and efficiency in licensing and regulating SMRs and enabling their safe deployment. For SMRs to be able to help provinces meet climate change objectives, the CNSC must be both efficient and effective. Funding we received in Budget 2022 is accelerating our readiness efforts. Those efforts include ensuring that our regulatory framework is appropriate for SMRs, that we have the right people, and that the necessary research is being conducted. SMRs are being proposed or considered for deployment in areas of Canada with no history of nuclear power generation. That requires early and ongoing engagement by all involved, including the CNSC, to build relationships and trust, especially with Indigenous nations and communities and potential host communities. SMR technologies are different from Canada's homegrown CANDU technology that the CNSC is accustomed to, so there's much to do in short order. Through our existing research program, the CNSC has extensive ties with Canadian academia on the science and research needed to support safety cases for CANDU reactors and other nuclear facilities. That approach is being leveraged for SMRs. Our budget 2022 funding will enable us to support independent third-party research on key SMR-related priority areas. This research will support our review of proposed SMR designs and projects and expand workforce availability in the nuclear sector. Based on a recent visit by CNSC President Rumina Velshi to the U.S. Idaho National Laboratory, their leading center for nuclear energy research and development, the CNSC would support a recommendation that the government make a substantial investment in Canada so we can develop similar capacities. Canada is only one of several countries considering SMRs. The CNSC is taking a leadership role and working closely with international regulators, notably the US and the UK, and international organizations. Our goal is to harmonize requirements and standards, share reviews, and streamline licensing processes as much as possible while maintaining our regulatory sovereignty. We're helping to advance this work directly through participation in the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA's Nuclear Harmonization and Standardization Initiative, and through President Velshi's role as chair of the IAEA's Commission on Safety Standards, which establishes standards for the global nuclear community. The work will be key for the safe and timely deployment of SMR's global fleet, both in Canada and especially in nuclear newcomer countries. Other regulators, proponents, and countries are looking to Canada to demonstrate that SMR projects can be done safely, quickly, and efficiently. For SMRs to play the role envisioned by many, dedicated efforts on the part of all involved are needed. CNSC is getting ready to efficiently regulate SMRs, and we will only allow safe projects to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ducrot, and thank you both for your time, your expertise, and also for being pay attention to the time. We appreciate that. We're now going to go to natural resources for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak about small modular reactors in Canada. Like Carolyn, I'd like to recognize that I'm joining you today from my home in Ottawa, which is in the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Protecting the health and safety of Canadians and the environment always has been and always will be the Government of Canada's top priority regarding nuclear energy. The Government of Canada has made a commitment to achieving net zero emissions by 2050 and by 2035 in the electricity sector. De nos jours, l'énergie nucléaire.
Today, nuclear energy is an important part of Canada's energy mix, currently accounting for 15% of our electricity generation and contributing to Canada's 82% non-emitting electricity supply. In the transition to a low-carbon economy, we need access to a variety of technologies. In this context, nuclear power is among those options that are being considered right now by many around the world.
Non-emitting source of energy. SMRs could also play a role in enabling deeper integration of variable renewables such as wind and solar into Canada's energy mix, especially in regions without significant hydro resources. SMRs are the next wave of nuclear innovation with the potential to play a role in the future of Canada's nuclear industry by providing non-emitting energy for a wide range of applications, from grid-scale electricity generation to use in heavy industry and remote communities. Canada has the potential to become a leader in the development and deployment of SMR technology and potentially claim a significant share of a projected global market estimated to be $150 billion a year by 2040. To capitalize on this opportunity, Natural Resources Canada helped lead the development of the SMR Action Plan for the development, demonstration, and deployment of SMRs. The action plan now has 119 partners who've committed to over 500 concrete actions. That said, while the federal government has important responsibilities relating to nuclear energy and the environment, jurisdiction over electricity systems ultimately resides with the provinces and territories. In this regard, I would note that Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and New Brunswick have shown their interest in using nuclear energy to help decarbonize their energy systems, with a premier-level memorandum of understanding to collaborate on SMR development and deployment. SMRs have the potential to contribute to advancing economic reconciliation through meaningful partnerships with Indigenous communities. To that end, we created an Indigenous Advisory Council to the SMR Action Plan. To protect the health and safety of all Canadians, our government is committed to continuous improvement with respect to ensuring that safe solutions are in place for managing radioactive waste and decommissioning now and in the future. And that commitment is supported by Canada's independent, internationally peer-reviewed nuclear regulator, the CNSC. As a part of its commitment to continuous improvement, the government is evaluating Canada's current radioactive waste policy, and we're developing a comprehensive new policy that further provides Canadians with confidence in the long-term management for all of Canada's radioactive waste, including any waste from future technologies, such as SMRs. Results from that engagement are being analyzed, and we plan to release the policy before the end of the year. Thank you, and we'd welcome any questions you have.
Thank you to all three organizations. We're grateful to have you tonight. And we will begin with our first round of questions. They will be for 6 minutes. And tonight we start with Mr. Tucker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andre from the Department of Natural Resources, we talked about net zero. With the current trend lines of emissions going up in Canada, not going down, if it's not nuclear, how do we get to net zero by 2050?
Thank you very much for the question. I think in the Canadian context, the journey towards net zero breaks down very quickly into a province by province or regional story. So the options available, for example, to the hydro-rich province is very different than those that are more reliant on fossil fuels. Certainly, it's challenging to, when you look at things from a system perspective, to look at how you replace the base load that is provided by coal and natural gas without looking at alternatives that might include nuclear. It could include more large hydro. It could include natural gas with carbon capture and storage. But certainly, the fact that you have 4 provinces that have identified nuclear as one of their priorities, and those collectively account for the vast majority of interests in Canada, tell us that it is very likely to play a significant role in the journey towards a net zero economy.
We always hear about net zero with the current demands, but if EVs take off, the projections that they do look like, they're going to the demand for electricity is only going to increase. So regardless of what province you're in, and yes, some provinces have more hydro, but and not to tell the provinces how to generate electricity per se, there's not that much hydro left that is easy in many of the provinces. So if not nuclear, how do we do it? Is the question that everyone's asking. Like, if there has been studies on what if we replaced all of that natural gas with, be it solar, how many acres or how much of the Canada would be covered in something like that would be enormous. So the promise of nuclear is hopefully to use less non-renewable resources that we have. And I'm just curious here if there's no one else or from the department's side of things, what is the plan B then?
Thank you for the question. Madam Chair, in looking towards the growth that would come, say, from electric vehicles, industrial electrification, heat pumps, for example, there's a wide range of projections for how much electricity use could increase in the coming years out to 2050. But certainly we expect it to be very significant. And so the challenge is not just decarbonization and reaching net zero by 2035, but also a really significant build out of supply. In my remarks, I showed sensitivity to the leading roles that provinces and territories play in this space. And I think I need to continue in that vein in the sense of not wanting to provide a prescriptive view on what any one province must do or not do. But I would certainly agree that a lot of Canada's best large hydro sites have already been developed. That's not something that would be easy to expand on a really large scale. We certainly hope that variable renewables will play a much larger role going forward. Certainly, if you couple that with energy storage, greater connection between provinces and territories, other things to modernize the grid, the amount of variable renewables can be increased quite significantly. But in the end, you still need to have some baseload that is provided by sources such as nuclear. So I'm avoiding providing a prescriptive response. I don't think it would be my place to do so, but certainly acknowledging that non-emitting baseload is a critical component of a future grid and that nuclear is one of the prime options for providing that.
Switch gears on the regulatory side to the CNSC. It is my understanding that the SMRs will be classified as a Class 1A nuclear facility, which is similar to the existing traditional plants out there. Could you expand more on this technology-neutral approach of it? How does that kind of break down? What are the benefits and disadvantages of having the same classification for SMRs versus the would-be CANDUs in Canada?
The classification for a Class 1A is in the Nuclear Safety Control Act regulations. It just is what it is. The key is that our regulatory framework is both performance-based and prescriptive, and the performance-based aspect of it allows it the flexibility to be able to be able to receive applications for novel technologies, including SMRs. And the key here is that we would treat any application in accordance with the regulatory requirements for the safety of human health, the environment, and in keeping with our international obligations. And SMRs would not be different in that respect in terms of a licensing review than another Class 1A like the CANDU reactors would be. But however, the regulatory framework itself would not have to change in that respect. We could look at the SMRs, depending on the design safety that is being proposed, with the graded approach and a risk-informed approach. And this is something that our regulatory framework is robust enough to allow.
Just briefly on how safe is nuclear? Are you proud of the record that our country has on, with nuclear facilities?
Yes, I'm very proud with the record that our country has with nuclear facilities. We have been regulating nuclear facilities for decades, nuclear power plants, and done so very safely.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Thank you. Witnesses, I hope you realize the committee's very interested in what you have to say. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. We're now going to go to Monsieur Lauzon for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure for me to speak today. First of all, I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing and also to give them the opportunity to clarify some things. First of all, Mr. Bernier, on June the 7th, you were called to testify before the Standing Committee on the Environment and Sustainable Development of the House of Commons. During this meeting, you answered a question asked by my colleague, Monique Posé, as to the percentage of energy that was renewable energy in Canada, and that if we set aside hydroelectricity, are we talking about 7%? But it was indicated that we're expecting an extremely rapid growth in the years to come, more specifically for wind energy. I hesitate to make a projection as to the role that could be played, but there seems to be a lot of potential to use this energy. If you expect a lot of growth in wind energy and that we have a good system with a lot of unused potential, why should the government invest in science and research around SMRs instead of concentrating on the technologies that we already use?
For the question, Madam Chair, and thank you for making the link. So yes, the figure of 7-8% is accurate for the amount of the contribution of wind and variable renewables, but it's predominantly wind to the production, the electricity generation in Canada today. So the overwhelming majority of that very much hydro. Every expectation that wind energy will increase substantially over the coming years. It's an increasingly mature and competitive technology, and one that, especially as you deploy wind over a larger and larger area, you can take advantage of that widespread to have when the wind is blowing in one place but not in another. It smooths things out at the system level a little bit better. Notwithstanding the expectation that we'll make a much larger contribution going forward, there are limits to how much wind or solar you can deploy and still maintain system reliability. There's a base load role to electricity generation that wind, at this point with the technology that we have, it can't fill that niche. And at some point, if we have better ways of storing energy over the long term, and our hydro dams play a very important role in that regard, but this is something where you'd be able to store energy and smooth out fluctuations over the course of a day, over the course of a week, over the course of months or even seasons. Once that happens, I think we can expect wind and solar's use to go up even more. At present, though, we don't have the technology available for wind or solar to play that role of baseload energy to the degree that we would need to maintain system reliability. And for that reason, non-emitting sources such as nuclear, large hydro, natural gas with carbon capture and storage are, I think will be part of the mix. And so for that reason, it's natural to focus on each of those in different ways. And I would refer to my earlier remark that you have four provinces that have indicated this is a priority for them. That is their jurisdiction, and we're pleased to be able to support that priority of theirs.
Okay. Merci.
Thank you. Mrs. Gershling, I understand that in your statement you mentioned earlier, I understand that Atomic Energy of Canada does no longer manufacture small nuclear reactors. You didn't really elaborate on this, but you did say that right now you're proceeding with partners rather than building this technology yourself. So why have you already been part of nuclear development and then now you've decided to no longer participate? How can this be explained? How can you explain this?
Thank you for the question. The decisions were made in past to separate the technology from AECL and provide exclusive rights to that technology to SNC-Lavalin. That decision was made many years ago, and we are proceeding on the path forward. The AECL of old was set out with the intention to define the nuclear industry, to direct it, and provide a technology push. The AECL of today is here to enable technologies, to provide services, be enabler, and a convener of minds and a trusted advisor. We have the power of a thriving national nuclear lab that can help tackle the challenges and demonstrate technologies. So the AECL of today is here to ensure that we have the capabilities and expertise to responsibly and efficiently deploy any new nuclear technologies in Canada.
Merci.
Thank you. One of the 4 themes and activities of research in the Federal Work Plan on Science and Technology Nuclear Activities is to reinforce national security, world security, nuclear preparedness and response to emergency situations. So if we look at environmental episodes, abnormal episodes caused by climate change.
Monsieur Lauzon, I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you like to ask the witness to table a response as your time is up?
Oui.
Okay.
Oui. C'est bien.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. My apologies. Maintenant, je vous passe la parole.
Now, I'll give the floor to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca. 6 minutes. Thank you. Allow me to thank the witnesses as well as my colleagues this evening. My first question will be for Mr. Bernier. During your opening statement, you said that Canada should be positioned as a world leader in the production of SMRs, and you said that there was a potential $150 billion, that there is a demand. So I'm trying to understand, to demystify things, that many countries have already produced SMRs, and notably China, South Korea, Russia, even the United States, of course. And they've asked the Energy Department to produce a report on different models of SMRs. And this was concluded in the report that SMRs would not be operational between now and the end of the decade. And even in 2022, we don't have one SMR in the U.S. that's ready to be used for commercial purposes. I'm trying to understand. All the countries try to commercialize SMRs on a worldwide level, but right now, yes, eventually there will be a demand, but these countries have not succeeded. I'm trying to get your point of view. Why would Canada be different from these countries that have already made attempts for many years to sell SMRs?
Thank you very much for the question, Madam Chair. So Canada, when I think about the potential role that we could play as an SMR provider, you'll see as an example right now Ontario Power Generation's decision to select the GE Hitachi BWRX 300 reactor. So that is, it's built off an existing reactor design involving two major industrial partners, General Electric and Hitachi. It may not be the case that there will be, say, a Canadian reactor that would be exported and used worldwide. But the first deployment of this reactor that I mentioned will occur at the Darlington site in Canada. And already there's significant interest, not just within Canada, Saskatchewan, for example, but outside of Canada, Poland, Estonia, as well, in use of that reactor. And so the economic opportunity is linked not just to whoever makes the reactor, but also the supply chains that support that. And in this case, because this will be the first grid scale deployment of an SMR in the West, it positions Canada, we hope, very favorably to benefit from that if others choose to adopt this particular reactor technology. And no disagreement, this is not something that will make a material difference before the end of the decade. It's not something where we expect SMRs to contribute on a large scale to the achievement of 2030 goals. And even by 2035, it's likely we'll see a very small number of SMRs deployed in Canada. But beyond that point, especially as we look towards what we expect to be a very significant expansion of the electricity system in Canada, but also globally to meet the needs of a decarbonized economy, that's where there could be a very significant role for SMRs. And Canada, as a leader in terms of demonstrating this technology, I mentioned the Darlington site as well. There's the Global First Power project at Chalk River. We hope that we're favorably positioned to benefit over time.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next question. For the CNSC, the Commission has the role of regulating the nuclear industry in Canada, but also has the role of developing nuclear energy in Canada. How are you making sure that there is no conflict of interest in the current configuration of nuclear governance? As I was mentioned, you have the role of developing, but also to ensure nuclear safety.
The CNSC's mandate is clearly on the regulation of nuclear energy from the full life cycle of nuclear, from mining and milling until, through processing, power plants, medical isotopes, waste management, and decommissioning. We don't have the mandate as a proponent for any type of technology. We review the technologies that come to us, and we review them to ensure that whatever we recommend to the Commission, we have used scientific basis, robust review of full and complete information. And then if we're not ready to recommend to the Commission because we don't think it's safe, we will not. But we don't have a development mandate.
Donc, juste me préciser, vous me dites, est-ce que vous...
So you're saying that you have no mandate from the Department of Natural Resources to develop the nuclear industry in Canada?
Correct. Our role as nuclear regulator, as a world-class nuclear regulator, is to be efficient and effective in our regulatory process, in our reviews of licensing applications, and in our compliance verification. Our role is not to develop. We do also have another role in terms of disseminating scientific information to the public, and sometimes this would mean debunking myths, but we don't have a role in developing power.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer vos mesures de...
Could you explain your mechanisms to ensure security of the citizens when we talk about the implementation and development of nuclear energy in Canada?
Madam Chair, I wonder if I could have a reframing of the question.
Thank you. Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca, short question.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca.
The witness to table the answer.
Effectivement, je vais demander la réponse par écrit parce que je crains que ça va prendre quelques secondes.
Yes, I would like to have a written answer. I'll repeat the question, though. What mechanisms does CNSC have in place to ensure the safety of citizens when we're talking about the development and use of nuclear energy here in Canada? Thank you, Mr. Blanchet-Jonca.
And with that, now we will go to Ms. Idlout. We're glad you've joined us for 6 minutes.
Thank you. I'm so used to having an Inuktitut interpreter. I almost started speaking in Inuktitut. I'll rejig my brain. I just wanted to first ask my question to Amy Gotchling in regards to the size of a reactor and what would be the average size of a reactor that would be necessary to power rural or remote communities. So, for example, in Inuvik, which has a population of about 3,243, there are 2 power plants there. One is diesel-powered with a total capacity of 6.2 megawatts, and one that is gas-powered, housing 3 gas-fueled generators rated at 2.8 megawatts.
Thank you for your question, Madam Chair. The size of the reactors that are geared for remote deployment would be around the 5 megawatt range. So, and the beauty of the SMRs is that you can plug and play. So if you need more than one to cover the energy needs that you have, so it would sound like you would need 2 of those.
So, could you provide an example of what kinds of waste management that would need to happen?
Thank you for your question. The solutions that we have in place right now for the current reactors that are in Ontario is quite sound, and the disposal solutions that we have in place and the policies that we have in place would also be applied to SMRs.
Okay, thank you. My next question will be to Caroline Ducros with the Commission. Have there been any discussions about training of Indigenous peoples to support the development of such SMRs, and what kinds of opportunities would there be to ensure that Indigenous peoples would be able to operate them?
Thank you for the question. We have a lot of the opportunities in terms of operating SMRs would have to be led by industry. Industry will be the ones who come forward with applications and are operators of facilities and the training, my expectation would also be on the proponent to do that. From the regulatory perspective, we have a duty to consult, and we have a very large duty that commitment to enter into relationships and collaboration with Indigenous people when it comes to licensing reviews and compliance verification. But we're not the operators. So I would put the onus on the proponents to undertake that type of activity, and perhaps pass it to Mr. Bernier in terms of the policies on equity and hiring.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just to briefly mention that as part of our work under the SMR Action Plan, we established an Indigenous Advisory Council. In fact, just next week, the SMR leadership table will be meeting. So this is deputy ministers, utility heads. It will be co-chaired for the first time by a member of the Indigenous Advisory Council. And one of the reasons is exactly as you described, to make sure that as part of the conversation, we're able to look at potential opportunities for Indigenous communities or development organizations. That could include on the skills training side, but also potential ownership stakes in any projects. There's, I think, a whole other conversation to be had about community acceptance, just to acknowledge that, but wanted to briefly mention the work of the council. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have a question for all three witnesses. It doesn't matter to me which order they answer in, but I did note that all three of the witnesses mentioned that they've had Indigenous engagement, but they didn't let us know what Indigenous nations or government organizations or whatever they had engagement with. I wonder if they could list those for us.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I'm on screen, so perhaps I could kick us off. So as a part of the SMR Action Plan, Natural Resources Canada carried out fairly extensive engagement at the community level, although it was primarily targeted at communities that either were close to existing nuclear sites or that might be implicated.
I'm sorry if I could just interrupt, because I did just ask for a list of Indigenous organizations or nations that you've engaged with.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Perhaps we could provide a list and follow up, if that's acceptable.
Yes, okay. Tabled with the committee. Thank you so much.
Okay, am I out of time?
You've got 20 seconds.
Okay, maybe a written response could be on the importance of impact assessments and how they would be used in this kind of process, if that's clear.
Thank you, Ms. Idlout, and thank you to the witnesses for supplying that information. We appreciate that. We're now going to go to the 5-minute rounds start the 5-minute round, and this time we start with Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Always a pleasure, and thank you for our witnesses for joining us today. I'm going to start with Mr. Bernier, if I can. Mr. Bernier, what progress has been made in making nuclear technology eligible for the government funding Green Bond program?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I feel I should acknowledge that the federal government's Green Bond program is something that is led by the Department of Finance. And although they do draw on the expertise of other federal departments, such as Natural Resources Canada, that I would be stepping outside my role to speak on that.
I guess I'll just maybe ask a broad question. Has Natural Resources had input on that program?
Yes, our input was sought as a part of the Department of Finance's development of the Green Bond program.
Just a general yes or no, does Natural Resources support that?
I feel what I could comment on, thank you, Madam Chair, is we understand as the Department of Finance developed its position on green bonds that it looked extensively at international practices and that nuclear was generally not included. And that includes, for example, in the United Kingdom, their green bond program, and the United Kingdom being a very significant nuclear power, their green bond program did not include nuclear. So certainly we inputted on the pros and cons, but it was ultimately their decision to make with reference to international practices in this area.
And just a follow-up question, do you know if the United States is using a similar program at this point?
I apologize, Madam Chair. I am not as familiar with the U.S. Use of that as an instrument, but we could provide that and follow up.
Okay, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. Ms. Ducrose, we had a scientist on the committee, Dr. Christopher Kiefer, who told the committee in June that all the nuclear waste that one person would create if all the power in their lifetime was produced by nuclear energy would fit, sorry, Madam Chair, I have a prop, into a pop can just like this. Do you agree with that assessment?
Unfortunately, I'm not the expert on nuclear waste. I would have to get back to you on whether it would fit into a pop can or not. In terms of whether or not it fits in the pop can is less significant to me than that every license application has clear delineation of what's going to happen to that waste, that waste is going to go to an authorized waste management facility, and that they are going to do what they can to reduce the amount of waste, and that it's safe.
Okay, I'll do a different question for you then. Canada is one of the leaders in nuclear power and research in the world. Do we currently have any issues regarding nuclear proliferation from our current electrical and research uses?
Canada is a signatory to the Treaty on Non-Proliferation. This requires us to forbid developing or acquiring nuclear weapons, and also it obligates Canada to accept safeguards verification from the International Atomic Energy Agency, and it requires us to implement export controls to ensure that any nuclear transfers don't contribute to other nations' nuclear programs. So from an SMR perspective, what the proponents will need to demonstrate that they meet CNSC's requirements in this respect as part of our mandate to make sure that we meet our international obligations to which we're signatories.
And do you have any recommendations for this committee on what changes we should seek, or any advice for that to ensure that our industry succeed?
Madam Chair, any recommendations that I would have is that we always ensure that we meet our obligations, and we carry on with our compliance verification as we do, and our work with international partners.
Thank you. And last question, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gosling. We had earlier some questions about, can we hit 2050 goal of net zero without nuclear? I'm going to ask you to answer the same question, please.
Thank you. Yes, I've also heard the same analogies made that there is no path to net zero without nuclear. We've also engaged in studies and see the gap is very large, and it was going to take the challenge that we have in nuclear and how much nuclear power we would need to hit that gap is the same across all energy industries. And I do believe it will take a mix of a diversified energy portfolio to hit that target.
Thank you. Bang on. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Thank you to all the witnesses. And with that, we will go to Mr. McKinnon for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in exploring the potential evolution of SMRs and potentially micro modular reactors. And specifically, I'm interested in ocean-going shipping. I know that as a sector, the freighters that go all around the world, they have an enormous CO2 footprint, and they tend to burn messy, dirty fuel as well. So if we could project the state of the art of SMRs or micro reactors, do you see the ability to economically deploy that sort of technology on, the typical ocean-going freighter? And I guess further to that, what might the challenges be to that, and what can we do as a government to encourage research in those directions? And that was a question, I believe, for atomic energy.
Thank you for your question. I I apologize, probably can't speak to the economic feasibility of such, but what I can point you to is that the marine transport industry is engaging with the nuclear industry to discuss these opportunities. We are doing so at CNL as well. And the parallel would be the historical use of SMR technologies for the Navy and their fleet. So there is a precedent set for using small reactors for water transport with the Navy, and I would draw more on that.
Well, thank you. I guess I'm going to carry on with understanding the scale of the problem in terms of nuclear waste, and potentially how it can be handled with SMRs in general. I mean, when you talk to people about the proliferation of SMRs, that's generally the first thing they're concerned about is what about all the nuclear waste? So perhaps, and I'll address this to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, perhaps you can address these concerns.
Thank you. Madam Chair, the nuclear waste is one of the things that we regulate, and it's part of the licensing application review. So any application that comes to us, the licensee has to have a path for where the waste will end up, and that waste has to end up in a licensed facility. Canada has managed its nuclear waste for quite some time. When it comes to policy decisions on reprocessing of waste and those types of things, that's the government of Canada that has to take that decision. But from the regulatory perspective, we will review each application and ensure that they minimize the amount of waste that they produce and that they have safe storage and management of that waste.
So I understand that the waste from one reactor might turn out to be the fuel for another. It might need to be refined. It might need to be repurposed in some manner. Is that a viable expectation that as we go forward, generating nuclear waste from these various reactors, that we will be able to redeploy the spent fuel, if you will, and the waste in terms of other technologies?
Well, I'll begin and then I'll pass it to NRCan. The policy on whether or not Canada is going to accept the reprocessing of nuclear waste fuel to use in another facility has not been determined yet. However, if Canada were to go in that direction and allow that type of technology, the CNSC would regulate it the same as we would regulate any other fuel or reprocessing facility. Our regulations are able to handle that type of novel technology.
Sure. So please do carry on natural resources, please, if you can.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have too much to add on that point. I think one of the main sensitivities when we get into reprocessing, especially if it involves the movement of nuclear waste across borders, is the risk of non-proliferation. And we know SMRs in general are using and producing a different kind of fuel and a different kind of waste than CANDU reactors. And so, by no means say an insurmountable obstacle, but a very different set of considerations than our current equilibrium, where we have natural uranium being used in country and not reprocessed. So Moltex, which is one of the SMR developers with roots in New Brunswick, looking actively at this. So many tough questions in the future, but certainly considered as one of the potential SMR models.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. McKinnon. We thank you for the questions. We thank you all to our witnesses. We will now go to Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to go ahead with CNSC. The Act on the Impact excludes from the evaluation impact evaluation nuclear fusion with a thermal capacity of over 200 thermal megawatts outside an existing nuclear facility. I'd like to know if the next projects for nuclear reactors that are announced will be subject to an impact assessment, and how Canadians and Quebecers can they make sure that this will be done in a safe way, and what environmental issues will be taken into account?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Impact Assessment Act has a project list which designates which projects are subject to the impact assessment. So in terms of the question, any SMR that would be located within the license boundary of an existing Class 1A nuclear facility, if the proposed project has a combined thermal capacity of 900 megawatt thermal, would be subject to an Impact Assessment Act, IA. And if it was located outside a Class 1 nuclear facility licensing boundary, it would, and has a capacity greater than 200 megawatt thermal, it would be subject to an Impact Assessment Act, IA. Having said that, any project that goes through the CNSC, any license application that goes through the CNSC is subject to an environmental protection review under the Nuclear Safety Control Act. And these reviews, to the second part of the question, ensure impacts on the environment from proposed projects are limited and manageable, and that the environment continues to be protected and that the health of persons are protected. And also, the environmental protection reviews ensure that the public and Indigenous
Pardonnez-moi de vous interrompre, je vais y aller pour une deuxième question.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I have a second question. Would it not be safer to systematically submit all projects? These projects can have environmental risks, so to know, why are we excluding projects of nuclear development projects outside the Impact Assessment Act?
The project list for the Impact Assessment Act was based on risk profiles of facilities. The Nuclear Safety Control Act is a very powerful act and has an environmental
I'm sorry to interrupt. Monsieur Blanchet-Joncaille, your time's up. Would you like the answer to be tabled?
Évidemment, Madame la Présidente, je vais demander une réponse par écrit. Merci.
Yes, please. I would like a tabled answer in writing. Thank you.
Breath. 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and my apologies to the panel for missing your testimony. I was at an emergency debate. But I will ask a question of Natural Resources Canada about training. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on the training that is necessary to, especially to operate small modular reactors. How long does that training take? What kind of qualifications is necessary, et cetera? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I will respond only briefly, and that reflects a little bit of a lack of in-depth expertise on that on my part. Certainly, the work to become an engineer or someone working in a nuclear facility requires extensive training, years and years in many cases. On top of someone's undergraduate and graduate work and specialized, and so that's a very top of mind thing for us as we think about the next generation of nuclear operators working on SMRs. In fact, Mr. Brady and I were meeting with McMaster University just a little bit earlier today, and we know that Canada's universities, among others, very interested in getting themselves ready well in advance to make sure that the workforce of the future is there. I don't know here if I could tag my colleague Dan Brady. Dan, if you'd like to join us for a moment, I don't know if you could elaborate a little bit more on the training requirements and what, if any, changes there might be as we think about work with small modular reactors.
Thank you for the question. I was going to reference them as part of the requirements. I was going to actually defer to the CNSC, as any operator there has to meet their requirements as part of their overall training. So maybe I'll provide a bit more aspect there, but it is a very important aspect going forward, the training of the younger generation into these roles, as well as making sure that the ones that are operating these facilities are well trained. So maybe Ms. Ducros can provide a little bit more insight.
Yeah, that is correct. Training of having adequate training of staff by the nuclear operators is a requirement of the license, and we do compliance verification against that requirement at all operating facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Cannings. To all our witnesses, we'd like to say thank you very much. You are the last witnesses of this study. We appreciate your time, your experience, your expertise, and we'd really like to thank you. And with that, to our committee, we will briefly suspend because we will be going into committee business. So, suspended.
you.